So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, affordable, safe, and reliable energy has historically been a given. Just 200 years ago, people chopped wood for heat. We made candles out of beeswax for light, and we bought hay or grew hay for transportation. But now, over the past 100 years or so, humanity is becoming much more dependent on energy from remote suppliers. Now, to a very large degree, our entire society and economies are dependent on fossil fuels for transportation, for cooking, for heating, for cooling, for manufacturing. It's nice that new technology and this transition to electricity is potentially cheaper, safer, and more reliable, but that assumption doesn't apply if we can't afford that power, or if it's unavailable in any way. The Middle East conflict right now is jeopardizing oil, gasoline, jet fuel, and natural gas. And obviously natural gas is what we're using to make most of the electricity. And the oil and refined products are what's providing our transportation and powering our industries. And to make matters worse, Mother Nature is rebelling against us. There's wildfires that are causing power failures and maintenance issues that are jeopardizing people's electricity supply. And all these supply constraints are getting worse while we're electrifying our society. EVs, heat pumps, AI data centers. And it's kind of amazing if you look at how we're here in Northern California, but this is a basic trend that's applying everywhere. We're looking at a bar chart of the historical utility rates. Our local utility here is PG&E. And as you just see these rates keep going up, and that becomes less and less affordable to everybody as we become an electrified society. We can't keep paying these sky-high electric rates. We need alternative sources of electricity, such as hydro, wind, solar, batteries. And we have to also look at how that electricity is being delivered to us, because this long-distance transmission is expensive. And at the end of the day, we want to understand and change the way utilities are poorly performing. They're supposed to deliver affordable, reliable, and safe energy. In many cases, they're not doing that. It's unaffordable, it's unreliable, and there's wildfires. It's not that safe. So if you're wondering why your energy bills are so high and what we're going to do, I suggest you turn to Turn. Turn's the Utility Reform Network. And my guest on this week's show is Mark Toney. He's the executive director of Turn. Mark has been on the show, but I've been reading his articles and very knowledgeable about what his group has been doing over the past 5 or 6 years regarding energy affordability in California. I would just characterize him as a thinking bulldog when it comes to solving the structural problems of high electricity costs. And here's a quote from Turn's website. As California residents and businesses struggle, there are still no limits on how much utilities can charge and increase rates, or how often they can ask for one. This system is broken. So with that background in mind, welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you very much, Barry. Happy to be here.
All right. Well, I give kind of a rough introduction of Turn, but if you could give us a little bit more information about what Turn does and who they're reporting to and how that organization is changing things in California.
Thank you, Barry. I'd like to introduce myself to start out with. I'm Mark Toney. I'm an organizer by trade, a sociologist by discipline, and a troublemaker at heart. I've been executive director of Turn for almost 20 years now. And what Turn focuses on is how to get the most reliable, the cleanest, the safest energy at the most affordable prices. I like to say we want the most green for the least green. And we believe you can do both. There's a reason our slogan is Lower Bills, Livable Planet, because we believe it is critical to tie together affordability and clean energy, and it can be done. And those are the policies Turn has been fighting for and taking the lead. Not just affordable, not just clean, but how do we get clean, affordable energy?
Yeah, Mark, I love when you say you're a troublemaker at heart. I kind of people characterize me the same way, and I like to create trouble for incumbent industries and organizations that get in the way of clean, affordable energy. And my slogan for my entire career in the solar business is that if you have the right kind of energy, solar and wind, it can be both clean and affordable. It used to not be like that when we were dependent on fossil fuels. So the paradigm has changed. Now we can have both. We just have to kind of make it happen. So first, before we dive into how to make it happen, give us a little background about how energy affordability affects various communities in California.
One of the things that we're looking at when we look at what's the crisis, what's the energy affordability crisis look like? Well, one thing we can look at is about 20% of all customers. I'm talking about 5 million customers are behind in their utility bills. So that's one indication. Another indication is how many families get shut off. In the past year, over 150,000 households had their electricity shut off because they fell behind on their bills, and almost 40,000 were never reconnected. That's what a crisis looks like. A crisis also looks like what's happening to businesses, small businesses that are shutting their doors because of electricity prices. One of the things that Turn does is we have an alliance with large industry, with agriculture, small business, and other industrial sectors, because this crisis is not only affecting you and me as residents, it's affecting everybody. What I like to tell people is we get hit, you get hit double every month. One, you get bill shock when you open up your bill or see it on the email every month. And the second thing is when you go to the grocery store, the price of electricity is baked into a carton of eggs, a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, a pound of hamburger. Part of the reason that they're going up is because the farms and the transportation and the stores have to pay higher electricity bills. So we feel it over and over and over in everything we buy.
When I kind of talk about really high electric rates and candidly and honestly, it's one of the reasons why we're in business is because rates are really high here in California, especially when the incentives change for solar and batteries. But let's take a step back. Why do we have this utility business model that leans so heavily on really good profits for the utilities and is so difficult for consumers? What's flawed about that business model?
Here's what's interesting. I think that the major factor in a utility being run well has to do with how the accountability is built in. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to talk about the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, known as SMUD. They have a reputation of being one of the best run utilities in the entire US. What's interesting about them is even though they are a monopoly in their service territory, because of the fact that it is multi-district and it's elected, there are strong levers of accountability. And so what SMUD has done is they have, and you can look it up on their website, a goal of reaching 100% clean energy generation by 2030 and keeping the rate increases within inflation. Now that's stunning, but it's also an example of how it is possible to reach 100% clean energy and to do it affordably. They have a model to do it. So I want to start with it's so easy to talk, to criticize this and that. but it's also a value I find to talk about what are the models out there, okay, that work well. And SMUD is one. I will tell you that LADWP, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, does not have the same sterling reputation as SMUD because they have a different model. Now, they're a public utility. And part of the issue here is it's about accountability, in my view. It's about how the Public Utilities Commission does their job or doesn't do their job in holding PG&E and Southern California Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric accountable to providing good service at reasonable prices.
Yeah, I love the example of SMUD. We're here in Silicon Valley, and here in Silicon Valley, we also have the Silicon Valley Power, which is the utility in the city of Santa Clara. And we
Yes.
also have the Palo Alto Municipal Utility, which serves just Palo Alto. And it's amazing when you look at the average rates in those two utilities, they're half of what PG&E charges for San Jose, Los Gatos, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, et cetera. So it can be done. We're talking about the territories are identical, so it can be done. So let's talk a little bit about the issue of regulation. Could better regulation help? And maybe why aren't the regulators regulating towards affordable, clean, reliable power?
I think it's important to understand what are some of the cost drivers that are making PG&E bills higher, that PG&E has, that Palo Alto and Sacramento and Silicon Valley Power don't have. And a lot of that has to do with wildfire risk. It costs tremendous amount of money, billions and billions of dollars to trim vegetation, to harden the grid. And PG&E does have a very large territory. So I at least want to acknowledge that. That is a concrete difference. But, and this is a very important but, part of the reason the bills are so high is because PG&E has overspent what they were approved to be spent. They are given what's called memorandum or balancing accounts. It's basically a credit card with no spending limit and a guarantee that somebody else, that's us ratepayers, somebody else will pay the balance and the interest. So part of what we're doing at Turn is one of the bills in the Turn affordability package this year is SB 1030, I'm sorry, SB 1098, which would limit the use of these accounts and promote more rate making to be done in the general rate case, where you decide, the regulators decide ahead of time. Got to tell you something about decision making. It is so much easier to say no to money being spent before it's spent. It's so much easier to cut a budget before a dollar has been spent than to cut it after the fact, after all the money has been spent. And so what we're doing is saying, let's get more of that money in the big general rate case ahead of time, and let's really reduce this after the fact money being spent.
You know, it's interesting when I look at how utilities get a guaranteed, I think it's like a guaranteed 10% profit on their assets. So the executives at these utilities and their stockholders, they make more money when the utility has more assets. And so the utilities are just genetically disposed towards building as many assets as possible. And to your point, when they want to spend more. They don't want to spend less. Now, the ratepayers want them to spend less, but the utilities find ways to kind of gold plate things. They take the expensive choices. I think it's a great idea to underground 10,000 miles of wires in California, but that's $100 billion when you kind of look at the numbers. That's stupid. There's really nobody, I mean, the regulators should be really looking at this and say, hey, no, we're not going to approve that. You have to do it a cheaper way. And they're, making sure that they're not playing around with these balancing accounts and make sure that they're spending less money rather than more. We want some beer level equipment installed. We don't want champagne equipment installed because that's bankrupting the state.
And Barry, I'm going to follow up on the point you just made because I think this is useful because utilities operate different from most businesses. Utilities do not make money on their retail sales like most businesses. Utilities only make money through investment in capital projects. Examples that you like new on the grid, wires and poles and equipment and things like that. And if that is the incentive, then you can't get mad at these companies for wanting to increase their rate base. What you can do, though, is to say, hey, let's reduce the amount of rate base, okay, so that you finance less. And you can say, let's create public financing. One of the bills we got passed last year that got passed, SB 254, has $6 billion of public financing, where it's going to be financed at a rate of closer to 5% instead of, now I know you're using 10%. I'll tell you something interesting. When you add up the fact that we actually have to pay for taxes, ratepayers also have to pay for the taxes owed on these capital projects, and there are other financing costs, it's closer to 13% we're actually paying in terms of outlay. So if you replace a 13% interest with 5%, I mean, think about it this way. You're buying a home and you're looking for a mortgage. It's pretty easy for you to figure out that a 5% offer from one mortgage company over 30 years is going to be a lot better than 13%.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if, I'm a private company right now, but I used to be a public company. And I'm like, it'd be nice work if I could get it. I should ask my board of directors if I can, the more money I spend, regardless of profits, the more money I spend, the more guaranteed profits I have. And that's kind of how the system is rigged towards the utilities getting a guaranteed profit. Now, the good news is when this system was set up and the way it's worked for 100 plus years is we have regulators, and the regulators are supposed to keep an eye on the utilities and making sure that they're accomplishing their goals. And in addition to the regulators, the California Public Utilities Commission, for example, we have legislators and there are lawmakers, and they're the ones making the laws. So between the lawmakers and the formal regulators at the Public Utilities Commission, why aren't they doing their job? Why are they kind of okaying these huge expenses or disallowing really good bills? I mean, this even goes all the way up to Governor Newsom. Why don't they allow these utility reform bills to go into effect?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but I'm going to talk about one of them right now, and that is the Wall Street investment firms. Wall Street investment firms are extremely powerful. In fact, they're more powerful than the utilities. And they operate as shadow parties. And what I mean by that is they don't file for party status in CPUC proceedings. But what they do is they publish newsletters where they make it very clear what they want the commission to do. They come and visit a few times a year and visit Sacramento, talk to legislators, visit San Francisco, talk to commission staff. And so part of it is that the Wall Street investment firms, and I'm talking about JP Morgan Chase, Citi, Goldman Sachs. You may have heard of some of these names, but they're the people who are providing the financing. Okay, they're the entities. And of course, they have a self-interest, it turns out. And part of that self-interest is the return on investment. And so part of what happens is gloom and doom. If you don't give the utilities what they want, the sky is going to fall. Okay? They won't be able to get financing. Their credit rating is going to be in junk status. And my point of view is that the reason that the credit rating is in fact so low has more to do with safety, has more to do with wildfires than it does with how much they're making on capital.
So at the end of the day, one would expect that our regulators, the Public Utilities Commission, would kind of see through that and ask harder questions. But for whatever reason, maybe it's obviously too much to address on this podcast, but for whatever reason, the regulators don't seem to be regulating our utilities in a way that's going to be affordable for Californians.
Sometimes they do a good job, but not often enough. And that's why Turn is spending so much time in the state legislature. We decided to go upstairs to their bosses and reach directly out for legislation that will set expectations that they do a better job with regulating and with affordability.
All right, so a lot of this is very theoretical, but let's talk about something that everybody in California is now addressing, and they have to deal with this, is when you open up your electric bill in March, you're going to see that the rates have changed. Now, you may have heard some publicity that there's new rates and everybody's going to be fine. The electric rates went down. But basically, when I looked at my bill, and here's a chart, the fixed charges doubled. I used to pay $12 a month, and this is pretty much everybody in PG&E territory. We used to pay $12 a month for the meter and for the fixed charges. Yeah. Now it doubled to $24. So that's a lot more money for every single person in California who's paying a bill. The utilities get another $12. That's a lot of money. Now, the good news is the variable rate, the dollars per kilowatt hours, it went down a little bit. So when I kind of look at it, it looks right now that it's about a wash, but PG&E is they have kind of carte blanche based on legislation. They can raise the fixed charges as high as they want. I mean, they had asked for over $100 per household per bill for fixed charges, and luckily it's only $24. But they're also very, very good at raising rates. What do you see and what are you hearing about the net effect on ratepayers with this claim that your electric bills are going down, but it's not really happening? What are you hearing?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. One is that the fixed charge is under the authority of this Public Utilities Commission. So PG&E can't decide it's just going to change it willy-nilly because they do have to get permission. The general idea is, how do we make utilities affordable for those who need it the most, particularly people who are very low income? And part of it is, how do we ask customers who are high income to pay a little bit more? That is part of it. The idea of, how the income tax system in California works. The higher our income, the higher percentage we pay of our income. And that's a progressive system. And it goes the other way around. The lower percent. And the problem with utility bills is it's the opposite. The lower your income, the higher percent of your income you pay per month. So we've got people who are very low income that are paying 20% of their income just on their monthly utility bill. And that's unsustainable. So part of the idea here, and it needs a lot more work, Barry, is trying to get to a system where those households who do have a higher income pay a higher fixed charge. Okay. It's not perfect. A lot more work needs to be done, but you asked me about it. That's the principle behind it.
So I've been kind of watching how PG&E, that's our local utility, their profits have been going, and they had a hard year in 2021 when they were forced to file bankruptcy because of the wildfires. But I decided to ask AI what the trend line was for PG&E's profits. And here's a graph. I mean, PG&E has just shown steady, I don't know what, 5 or 10% growth over the last 4 years, 2022, 23, 24, 25, another record year for profits. That should be a little bit embarrassing to anybody who's saying, hey, the utilities are making really high profits while we're all suffering. What can we do to rein in those profits? And maybe one of the things we can do, and I heard about it, is reducing that guaranteed rate of return, from 10 or 13% down to 7 or 8, which is more realistic based on the risk profile of the utilities.
So if you want to reduce the profits, there are three policy levers. Okay. Lever number one is we do exactly what you said, reduce the rate of return. I will say that the Public Utilities Commission did reduce the rate of return by 30 basis points in this past year. So that's some progress, okay? The second thing is to increase public financing because public financing is so much cheaper. Why is public financing cheaper? Anytime you finance something, there's the cost of putting the deal together, and there's cost of money over time. Those two remain, whether it's corporate financing or public financing. The reason that the difference between corporate financing and public financing, the 7% difference, is the profit. Okay, the corporate profit. So getting more into public financing will reduce the cost for ratepayers. And a third is to do what you said earlier, Barry. Instead of spending so much money burying thousands and thousands of miles of line, put in insulated overhead lines that are just as safe, that are a fraction of the cost, 20% of the cost, 1/5 of the cost, and is also 5 times faster. You can get 2,000 miles of overhead insulation, 3,000 miles in a single year, rather than waiting 8 or 9 years. And for people that are living in high fire risk zones, every year that you have to wait is another year of extreme risk. And so it's so if we say, hey, PG&E, if the commission said, no, we're not going to let you underground all those miles, we're going to make you save the money, speed up the safety process, and do it for far cheaper. That's what Turn has been fighting for years. And we've made some progress, but we have clarity that there are ways to control skyrocketing rates. You can stop the overspending, stop the overinvestment.
It's interesting that we had to run wires in the past to every single building that needed electricity. I don't know, 70, 80 years ago, we created the Rural Electrification Co-op, which allowed farms that maybe, 50 miles or 10 miles away from where there's a power plant, they would have to get power run to them. And that was the only way for them to get power. Now, with microgrids, with solar and batteries, you don't need to run wires to every single building, especially when the cost to run those wires may be a few $100,000. So that's a technological change. Now, taking it one step further, we're at the point right now where homeowners, businesses, they can say, "Hey, I'm trying to get away from these high electric rates. I'm going to put in solar and batteries." And communities can do that also with community solar. So it's no longer necessary to have all of the power to every single building come over existing wires. We can put in what the utilities called distributed energy resources. I call them customer energy resources because the customers buy those. And the good thing about customer energy resources or CERs is there's no cost to society. There's no cost to ratepayers. That's something that customers would put in themselves, and it's easy to get the money for that. So, how can we change the paradigm towards a more democratized, distributed grid that would be reliable because these buildings would have backup power and much more affordable because if you run the numbers for solar and batteries, it's way cheaper than paying, an average of 40 cents a kilowatt hour with the utility.
Barry, I'm glad you brought that up. Let me tell you what I'm really excited about in this field of particularly around storage. The bottleneck to making these microgrids work is and always has been the storage because lithium ion technology, as you well know, has limitations. Okay. Um, and we're talking about a few hours of, being able to really discharge at a rate that, people really need and the need to, quite frankly, be recharged on a daily basis. All right, with the sun and the challenges of when we've got, 2 weeks of rain or what have you. Okay. Now, I've been following the storage technology and the sodium iron storage that I have seen that's, really on the cutting edge has so much promise of being less expensive, way more capacity, and non-toxic materials at the end of the life cycle. Because one of the things we're all concerned about is not just how the products are being used now, but the entire life cycle. How is it going to affect the environment when it has reached the end of its life cycle? Those of us concerned about nuclear energy are, most concerned is because we're looking at the entire life cycle, okay? From the mining of the uranium to the disposal. Oh, yeah, they haven't figured that out yet. But no, seriously, okay? We're not just looking at the isolated frozen point of time where it is producing clean energy, where I will admit that part, but I'm going to suggest we need to look from beginning to end.
Yeah, it's amazing. The last nuclear plants that were built in South Carolina, the Vogtle plants, I think they were 20 to 22 billion dollars. And now to decommission a nuclear plant, we slowed down doing that, but to make it safe again, it's $4 or $5 billion. The ratepayers have to pay all that. But Mark, talking about the sodium batteries, what you're really hitting the nail on the head is the technology is getting better and better. And if I look at the trajectory of the declining cost of batteries, it's mirroring the trajectory of solar panels. And heck,
Yes.
when I started installing solar panels, they were $4.50 a watt just to buy it from a distributor. Now they're less than 45 cents. That's a huge, huge change. And that's the same thing that's going to happen with batteries. Yes, there's
Yeah.
issues about where they're manufactured, et cetera, et cetera. But the costs for homes and businesses and individual ratepayers to put in their own power plants or for community solar to put in a power plant over an apartment building and parking lot, they keep coming down faster, steadily, faster and faster. So technology's on our side. I think to me, the regulation is moving a lot more slowly than the technology. And we've got to find a way for that regulation to keep up with these new technologies.
Well, and the sodium iron is also using common elements. We're not using rare earth materials that are very limited in terms of global distribution, right? So I'm very optimistic, is all I'm saying, of what I see kind of like over the horizon here.
Yeah, no, I mean, 7 or 8 years ago, batteries, the costs have come down by 30 or 40% net cost for a complete battery system. Now, the cost of the batteries themselves have come down even faster than that. But when you're a business or utility or a home looking at putting in batteries, you've 50% of the cost or more goes into the labor, the design, the maintenance, the structure. The batteries are a very small part of it. Still the biggest. The same as solar. The solar cells are the biggest part of that system. But those costs are coming down really fast. And if we can get our government to maybe get out of the way of impeding more manufacturing in the U.S., that would be really good.
Yeah, yeah. That's
Let's change gears a little bit. Your group is very, very active with legislation. Tell us about some of the legislation that you're sponsoring this year.
There's AB 2338. Um, this is a bill that this is Assemblymember Ransom out of the Central Valley. It would basically require utilities to, right now, whenever there's a general rate case, the starting point is sky is the limit. There's no limit to how much they can ask for. So they can ask for 20%, 30% over the 4-year time period. And what this bill would do is to say you can ask for whatever you want, but you have to submit a proposal, an additional proposal that's capped at the annual Social Security cost of living adjustment. And the idea is that the Public Utilities Commission would be required to use that as the starting point. Okay? Now, anyone who's ever done any negotiations between two sides knows that the most important number is the starting point. Okay? It is right now the way it works is they ask for sky high and then turn in the other groups because that's the starting point. We have to fight to whittle it down. Okay? If you say no, you got to start with the rate of inflation, then the utilities have to fight for every dollar over it. And we believe that's going to yield a better result. And quite frankly, people don't get a rate increase every time there's a utility bill increase. And so that we think would be a game changer. I will tell you that we tried to get it last year. PG&E fought it tooth and nail and finally got it killed. I think I already talked about the taking away the credit cards that have no limit and a guarantee that someone else is going to pay. That's SB 1098. We've got a bill, AB 1715, that basically requires utilities to report public funding so that when they get money from non-ratepayer sources, they get grants, they get public funding, they don't do double dipping. They can't, they have to show we've taken away ratepayer funds because we had alternate funds. So that's an important accountability. We have SB 905, which is a bill that will reduce utility spending and profits. It has a lot of different factors. And one of the things it does is it ties utility pay to reducing rate increases. Okay, so you were talking earlier about it seems like the more they spend, the more they earn. Well, we're going to try to reverse that and say the higher the bills go up, the lower you earn. If you really want an incentive, we don't mind giving an incentive if the bills come down. Okay? We think that's a fair trade, but the bills got to come down for that. So I think those are the major ones. I'm not going to go through all of them right now, Barry, but I hope that's enough for now.
Yeah, that's really good. So that leads to the obvious question, what can our listeners do? What can people do to help get this legislation passed by the legislature. And also, the last hurdle is getting Governor Newsom to sign that legislation that might not be as favorable to utility profits.
Here's what I'll say. There's one very simple thing, which is to go on the Turn website and sign up for our action alerts, because then we can let you know when the bill hearings are happening, when it makes a difference to sign a petition or send a message. Because we will send out, messages to people. So that's one. But one of the things I like to tell people is every single month, when you open up your utility bill, make 3 phone calls. And I'm going to suggest phone calls, not, typing. Okay? Phone calls. Call your state assembly member, call your state senator, and call the governor and say, support Turn's affordability package. The bills are too doggone high. I'm sick and tired. And you let them know who I vote for. Okay? My vote is going to be dependent on what you do and how you vote. The other thing is that when you sign up for the Turn Action Alert, we're going to let you know every year we do what do you call it? We do a report card for every legislator, 80 assembly members, 40 senators, so that you know how your senator and how your assembly member voted on affordability and accountability. You will know, okay? That's part of the reason there's value in signing for it, because we'll make sure you know and you can look it up yourself.
One last question before we start wrapping up. How did you get into the energy industry?
When I had my first job out of college, it was as a community organizer for a welfare rights organization. And our number one issue was utility shutoff, where families with elderly people, disabled members, small infants would come into the office and they got their light shut off. They got their heat shut off, and it's the dead of winter, and people are sick in the house. And so we would do little protest actions at the gas company, the electric company, the Public Utilities Commission, and we would get them turned back on. After a while, we learned that that wasn't enough. So we got involved in opposing rate increases. And then we got involved in a percentage of income plan. This is back in Rhode Island in the 80s and 90s. And we said that true affordability is not based on the cost of the commodity. It's based on the household income. And that's the idea of percentage of income. So I guess I got started through organizing. And then when I moved to California and was looking around for jobs, Turn came up and they were looking for someone who had experience as an organizer, as a public policy advocate. I'm not an attorney, although many attorneys work at Turn, but to elevate Turn externally to get more media coverage, more legislation to complement all the work at the Public Utilities Commission.
It's amazing the stories that people have, to get where we are right now. And you're one of those people that's just stubborn and just wants to make the changes. So that's absolutely terrific.
I am hard-headed.
and how can people get in touch with you?
I have a very simple email. It is my first initial last name, mtoney@turn.org.
Great discussions, and I'd love to have you back on the show and see how this legislation works out next year. That's all the time we have for this week's show. Thanks, Mark, for joining me, and thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. If you missed any of today's show, you can always go to our website at energyshow.biz and listen to the podcasts.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's Energy Show.